Sometimes the people who respect you the most are not the ones who praise you. They don't constantly tell you how impressive you are. They don't need to remind you that you're important. In fact, they may barely say anything at all, but you notice something. When you speak, they listen differently. When you set a boundary, they don't push as hard. When you walk into a room, their behavior changes just a little. And if you've ever wondered whether someone genuinely respects you, there's a good chance you're looking for the wrong signal. Because respect is rarely loud, it's usually hidden inside small behaviors that people don't even realize they're showing. Think about someone you know, maybe it's a friend, a coworker, a family member, or someone you've always had a complicated relationship with. They might disagree with you, they might tease you, they might even challenge you. But somehow there is a certain line they don't cross with you, and you've probably felt it, even if you couldn't explain it. That's because respect isn't always expressed through compliments. Sometimes it's expressed through restraint, sometimes it's expressed through attention, and sometimes, strangely enough, it's expressed through disagreement. The deeper you look at human behavior, the more you realize that people reveal how they value you through what they consistently do when they have nothing to gain from doing it. So let's look at 7 signs that someone may secretly respect you, starting with one of the easiest signs to miss. The first sign is that they actually listen when you speak. Not just hearing your words, listening, there's a difference. You can tell when someone is simply waiting for their turn to talk. They're looking at you, but their mind is somewhere else. They're preparing their response. They're checking their phone. They're already deciding what they think before you've finished explaining yourself. But when someone respects you, something changes. They give your words a little more weight. They may not agree with you, they may even challenge what you're saying, but they let you finish, and that matters. Because attention is one of the most valuable things a person can give another human being. Think about a conversation you've had where you felt completely understood. You didn't necessarily feel agreed with, you just felt heard. There is something deeply human about that. When someone listens carefully, they're communicating something without saying it directly. They're saying, your thoughts are worth processing. And that doesn't mean every person who listens carefully respects you deeply. Some people are simply polite, some are naturally attentive. So you shouldn't take one conversation as proof of anything. The important part is the pattern. Do they remember things you've told them? Do they bring up your ideas later? Do they ask questions because they genuinely want to understand? Do they change their behavior after you've explained how something affects you? That's where the signal becomes stronger. Because respect doesn't just create attention, it creates consideration. And consideration is much harder to fake consistently. There's another interesting part to this. People often assume that someone respects them because that person agrees with them. But agreement isn't respect. Sometimes the person who respects you most is the person who feels comfortable enough to disagree with you honestly. They don't simply tell you what you want to hear. They say, I don't think you're seeing this clearly. And then they explain why. That can feel uncomfortable, but there's a difference between being challenged and being dismissed. Someone who dismisses you doesn't care enough to engage with your thinking. Someone who respects you may challenge your thinking because they believe you're capable of handling the challenge. That's a very different relationship, and it leads to the second sign. They don't feel the need to constantly prove that they're better than you. This one is subtle. Imagine you're talking about something you're good at. Maybe you achieved something at work, maybe you've learned a skill, maybe you accomplished something you've been working toward for months. There are people who immediately turn your achievement into a competition. You say, I finally finished it. They respond with, yeah, I did something like that years ago. You tell them something you're proud of, suddenly they have a bigger story, you share a success. They have to remind you of theirs. It may not always come from arrogance. Sometimes it comes from insecurity. When someone feels threatened by your success, they may unconsciously try to restore their position by proving that they are still above you. But someone who genuinely respects you doesn't always need that competition. They can let you have your moment. They can acknowledge your strength without feeling weaker themselves. And that tells you something important about their internal world. Secure people don't need every interaction to establish a winner. They can appreciate someone else's ability without experiencing it as a personal threat. So if someone can say, that's actually impressive, and leave it there, pay attention. Especially if they don't usually compliment people. Sometimes the absence of competition is itself a form of respect, because they're not trying to reduce you so they can feel bigger. They're comfortable enough to recognize your value, and there's an even deeper version of this. A person who respects you may actually become more careful around your time. They understand that you're not endlessly available. They don't assume you'll always drop everything for them. They don't constantly demand explanations when you say no. And that brings us to the third sign. They respect your boundaries even when they don't like them. This is one of the clearest indicators of genuine respect. Anyone can respect a boundary that benefits them. The real test comes when your boundary inconveniences them. You say, "I can't talk tonight." They might be disappointed, but they accept it. You say, "I don't want to discuss that." They may not understand, but they don't keep pushing. You say, "I need some time alone." And instead of turning it into an accusation, they give you the space. That doesn't necessarily mean they will always react perfectly. Human beings get emotional, people become frustrated. Sometimes someone might push back before realizing they've crossed a line. But over time, someone who respects you learns where your limits are, and they adjust. That's important because boundaries are not really about controlling other people. They're about communicating what you will and won't participate in. And the way another person responds tells you a lot. If they repeatedly ignore your boundaries, guilt trip you, punish you with silence, or make you feel selfish for having needs, that's not respect. But if they can disagree with your boundary while still honoring it, that's different. They are recognizing that your autonomy matters. And there's something beautiful about that. Because respect doesn't mean, "I like every decision you make." It means, "I recognize that you are a separate person and I don't get to control you." That's a much deeper form of respect. And sometimes, you won't recognize it until you stop making yourself constantly available. The moment you become less accessible, certain people reveal what they actually thought of you. Some become angry because they were attached to your availability, others simply adjust, and the ones who adjust may have respected you more than you realized. The fourth sign is that they remember the small things, not necessarily the obvious things. The small things, you casually mention that you don't like crowded places. Months later, they choose somewhere quieter. You tell them you're working on something important. Weeks later, they ask how it went. You mention a difficult conversation you were nervous about. Later, they remember and ask what happened. These moments can feel insignificant, but psychologically they aren't. When something matters to us, we pay attention to it, not perfectly, not constantly. But naturally, our minds tend to give more importance to information connected to people or things we value. That's why a person might remember a tiny detail about someone they care about while completely forgetting something they were told yesterday by a stranger. So when someone consistently remembers the little things about you, it may be a sign that you're mentally important to them. And again, this doesn't automatically mean romantic attraction. That's an important distinction. Respect isn't the same thing as love. Attention isn't automatically attraction. And remembering details doesn't mean someone secretly wants a relationship with you. Human behavior is more complicated than that, but it can mean that they take you seriously. They've mentally filed away pieces of who you are, and that matters. There's another form of this that people often miss. They remember your preferences even when you're not around. For example, you're in a group deciding where to eat. Someone says, "Let's not go there, he doesn't like that kind of food." You didn't ask them to remember, you didn't remind them, they just did. That tells you that your preferences exist in their mental map of the world. You occupy a small space in their thinking, and genuine respect often looks like that, not grand gestures. But quiet consideration. The fifth sign is that they trust your judgment. This can appear in surprisingly small ways. They ask what you think, they come to you when they're uncertain. They might say, "What would you do?" or "I need your opinion on something." Now, not every request for advice means respect. Some people simply ask everyone. But if someone consistently values your perspective, especially in areas where they could easily decide for themselves, that can reveal something deeper. They see you as someone whose judgment has weight, and notice something interesting. Respect often appears through questions. A person who respects your mind doesn't always tell you what to think. They ask what you think. That's a powerful distinction. They might say, "How do you see it?" instead of immediately telling you how you're supposed to see it. That creates intellectual respect. They're not just interested in your presence, they're interested in your perspective. And sometimes you'll notice this at work. Someone who is technically senior to you may still ask for your opinion. Or a friend who normally makes quick decisions may pause and ask what you would do. That doesn't mean they think you're always right. It means they believe your thinking is worth consulting. And there's a strange confidence that comes with being respected this way. You don't have to prove that you're intelligent every 5 minutes. People already know what you bring to the conversation. This is one reason truly respected people often don't talk as much as people expect. They don't constantly announce their intelligence. They don't interrupt everyone. They don't fight for attention. Their reputation begins speaking before they do. And that leads naturally to the sixth sign. People are more careful with how they treat you when others are watching. This one can be especially revealing. Imagine you're in a group. Someone who normally jokes around with everyone suddenly becomes a little more measured when speaking to you. They might still tease you, they might still disagree, but there is a certain boundary, a certain awareness. They know there are things they could say, but choose not to. That restraint can be meaningful, because respect often changes behavior before it changes words. A person may never say, "I respect you," but they may think twice before embarrassing you. They may defend your reputation when you're not there. They may stop someone else from crossing a line. They may give you credit for an idea even when they could easily take it for themselves. And that last one is especially powerful. Giving someone credit costs you something. That's why it can be a strong signal. Imagine you come up with an idea at work. Later, during a meeting, someone presents the idea. They could easily pretend it was theirs. Instead, they say, "Actually, that was her idea." That tiny sentence tells you a lot. They're not trying to absorb your contribution into their own status. They're willing to make sure other people see your value. That's respect in action, and sometimes it's even quieter. Maybe someone corrects another person who is speaking unfairly about you. Maybe they say, "That's not really fair, you should hear his side." You may never find out about it, but that's the point. Some of the strongest signs of respect happen when you aren't there to receive them, because when there's no audience, there's less incentive to perform. And behavior without an audience often tells us more than behavior in public, which brings us to the seventh sign. They feel comfortable being honest with you. This might sound strange. You might think respect means someone always treats you gently, but genuine respect can actually make honesty easier. A person who respects you doesn't necessarily feel the need to protect your ego from every uncomfortable truth. They can tell you when you're wrong. They can say, "I don't think that was your best decision." They can point out something you don't want to hear, but the key is how they do it. There's a difference between honesty and humiliation. A disrespectful person uses your weakness to make themselves feel powerful. A respectful person can tell you a difficult truth without trying to destroy your dignity. They might say, "I understand why you did it, but I think you're making this harder for yourself." That's very different from, "You're always like this, you never learn." One attacks your identity. The other challenges your behavior. That distinction matters enormously. Because someone who respects you can separate who you are from what you did. They don't reduce you to your worst moment. They don't use one mistake as proof that you're a bad person. They leave room for growth. And perhaps that's one of the deepest forms of respect anyone can give you. The belief that you are capable of becoming better. Think about the people you genuinely respect. You probably don't respect them because they're perfect. You respect them because of something beneath the surface. Maybe they keep their word, maybe they stay calm under pressure, maybe they admit when they're wrong. Maybe they don't need constant approval, maybe they treat people well even when they have nothing to gain. Maybe they have boundaries, maybe they know how to walk away. And here's where this entire idea becomes more interesting. You can spend a lot of time trying to figure out whether someone respects you, when the more important question might be, what are you teaching people to expect from you? Because respect isn't something you can force. You can't demand genuine respect from someone who has decided not to give it. And constantly asking, "Do they respect me?" can become its own trap. You start analyzing every text message, every facial expression, every delayed reply, every conversation. Every time someone looks away, and suddenly you're trying to decode another person's mind instead of living your own life. That's exhausting, and it's also unreliable. One behavior rarely tells you the truth. Patterns do. That's why these seven signs should never become a checklist for judging everyone around you. Human beings are inconsistent. Someone can respect you and still forget something. They can respect you and still disagree with you. They can respect you and still become frustrated. They can respect you and make mistakes. And you can respect someone without liking everything about them. That's an important distinction. Respect doesn't mean admiration. It doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean friendship. It simply means recognizing another person's value, autonomy, dignity, or capability in some meaningful way. And sometimes, the most surprising people can respect you. Someone you don't get along with may still respect your strength. A difficult coworker may still recognize your competence. A person who argues with you may still trust your judgment. Someone who isn't emotionally close to you may still be careful with your boundaries. That's why respect can exist quietly between people who aren't necessarily close. And there is another uncomfortable truth. Sometimes people begin respecting you when you stop trying to make them respect you, when you stop explaining every decision, when you stop chasing approval. When you stop shrinking yourself to keep everyone comfortable. When you become comfortable saying no. When you become willing to walk away from conversations that repeatedly degrade you. Not because you're trying to appear powerful, but because you no longer need to negotiate your worth. That's when something changes. People begin to understand where you stand. And clarity creates a different kind of social response. You become predictable in the healthiest sense. People know that you'll be kind, but not endlessly available. They know you'll listen. But you won't tolerate everything. They know you'll accept criticism, but you won't accept humiliation. They know you can apologize, but you won't beg for forgiveness for things you didn't do. That balance is powerful, because respect often grows where self-respect is visible, not performative self-respect, not arrogance, not acting cold, not pretending you don't care about anyone. Real self-respect is quieter, it sounds like, I care about you, but I also care about myself. I can disagree with you without attacking you. I can admit I'm wrong without believing I'm worthless. I can walk away without needing to make you regret losing me. That's maturity. And mature people often create a different kind of relationship around themselves. People know where they stand. They don't have to guess which version of you will appear depending on who is watching. There's consistency, and consistency is one of the foundations of trust. So if you're trying to figure out whether someone secretly respects you, don't obsess over a single moment. Look at the pattern. Do they listen? Do they allow you to have your own boundaries? Do they remember what matters to you? Do they value your judgment? Do they give you credit? Do they tell you the truth without trying to humiliate you? And perhaps most importantly, do they treat your dignity as something that matters? Because respect isn't always visible in what people say, sometimes it's visible in what they refuse to do. They refuse to embarrass you. They refuse to manipulate you. They refuse to treat your boundaries as invitations to push harder. They refuse to make your weakness into entertainment. They refuse to take credit for your work. And they refuse to reduce you to your mistakes. That's why respect can feel almost invisible. It's often made of things that don't happen, no unnecessary humiliation, no constant competition. No forced control, no endless dismissal, just a quiet recognition. You matter, and maybe the most valuable thing you can take from all of this is not learning how to detect respect in other people. It's learning how to recognize what respect should look like in your own behavior, because once you understand it, you start noticing something else. The people you respect don't always have the loudest voices, they don't always have the highest status, they don't always have the most followers. Sometimes they're simply the people who make others feel safe enough to be honest, strong enough to disagree, and free enough to be themselves. That's a different kind of power. And it's the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. So the next time you wonder whether someone respects you, don't focus only on their words, watch their patterns. Watch what happens when you say no. Watch what happens when you succeed. Watch how they treat you when you're not useful to them. Watch whether they can disagree without degrading you. Watch whether they protect your dignity when there's nothing to gain, because eventually, people reveal what they truly think of you, not through one dramatic confession, but through hundreds of tiny decisions. And sometimes the person who never says, I respect you, has already been showing you that they do. If this made you look at human behavior a little differently, you'll probably enjoy the deeper conversations we explore here at NEXMIND Core. And remember, you don't have to convince everyone of your value. The right people notice it in the way you live.